Adorama TV presents Digital Photography One-on-One, where we answer your questions. Here's your host, Mark Wallace.
Welcome to this week's episode of Digital Photography One-on-One. I'm Mark Wallace. Well, this week we're going to be talking about using a studio strobe on location. And to get things started, here's this week's question from Brandy Clark. Can you tell me how to adjust my studio flash to the available light when shooting outside? Balancing the light from a studio strobe with available light outside can give you some stunning images like this that we shot earlier. But to get it right, there are a few things that you have to know. When you use a flash of any kind, you have to control two exposures at the same time. Now the reason for this is that you're working with at least two different sources of light. Let's take a look at these two sources of light. One of the sources is called ambient light. That's the light that comes from the sun. Sometimes it's called available light. The other source of light is called artificial light. That's the light that comes from your studio strobe. Ambient light is light we cannot control. We'll have to adjust our camera's settings to the ambient light for a proper background exposure. Light from our strobe is light that we can control. Once we have the exposure set for the ambient light, we can adjust the output of our strobe to match and get a perfect fill light. Because we have two different sources of light, that means we have two different exposures to work with. Let's start by talking about the ambient light. And we can't control the ambient light, so we need to adjust our camera so our ambient light is exposed properly. And just a note, since we can't control the ambient light, it's really important that you shoot at a time of day when the light looks its best. Try shooting just after sunrise or just before sunset. You know, if you shoot in the middle of the day, well, you're probably not going to get great results. Now, since we're using a studio strobe on location, we also have some limits with what we can do with our camera. First of all, we can't set our shutter speed faster than our camera's sync speed. And that's normally around 250th of a second. And because we're shooting with a studio strobe, we'll also have to shoot in manual mode. Well, now that we know about the boundaries, we can begin to set our exposures. And yes, I'm saying exposures because once again, you have two exposures to set. One for the ambient light and one for the strobe. And I know this sounds complicated, but it's really not. In fact, here are 3 steps that will help you get started. The first step is to set your camera to manual mode. Make sure your shutter speed is set to your camera's sync speed. The second step is to point your camera to the area just behind your subject and adjust your aperture until you have a correct exposure. And finally, the third step is to meter your flash. Adjust your flash output until it meters at the same f-stop value as your camera settings. Once you finish those 3 steps, you're ready to start shooting. But there are 2 more steps that can really help you out. Step 4 is to take a test shot and see how everything looks. You might want to adjust your shutter speed if you want to change the ambient light exposure. Now you can always overexpose or underexpose the background depending on the look that you want to achieve. Now I really like to overexpose my backgrounds when the sky doesn't have much character. You know, in those days when there are just no clouds in the sky or the sky is just gray, something like this. Now notice we've overexposed the background, but we made sure that we balanced the flash so it looks really natural. Or you can do something that actually looks much more natural like this shot. And in this shot, we balanced the fill flash exactly with the background, and it's hard to tell that there's a flash in this image. But like I said to begin with, I really like having my background super overexposed, and doing this, I can just use a flash to fill in the front, and it gives me that look that I'm going for. Now, some people are just the opposite. They really like to underexpose their background. Now, if you've tried this and you can't underexpose because the shutter speed is as fast as it will go, well, you can always use your aperture. Just remember, if you change your aperture value on your camera, well, you'll also need to adjust the flash output to match. You know, at smaller aperture values, you're going to really need some punch from your flash. That's why I like shooting with the flash with at least 600 watt-seconds of power. And finally, step 5, shoot and repeat, making adjustments to the ambient light as it changes. And that's really how it goes. Shoot, take a look, see how the shot looks, make some adjustments, and then just keep going. Now I know that's a lot of stuff to remember, but we did this outside earlier, so let's take a look. Well, here we are in the park, and in Arizona we have the sun setting really rapidly, so we have to work fast, and that's how it is when you're shooting with a flash on location. You have to work fast because as the sun is moving, you have to make multiple changes. So we're going to walk you through this pretty quickly. We have a model here. This is Catherine. She's going to be helping us out. And we don't have a lot of skies tonight, so what we're doing is we're shooting with this tree over here that's giving us a nice soft background, and we have a nice shadow and soft light. So we're doing that. But we have enough of light coming through the trees that we'll get some nice highlights on the back of Catherine's head. So we have 5 steps. The first one is to make sure that you're shooting in manual mode, and I have my Canon 1D Mark IV set to manual mode. And remember, we have a sync speed limitation, so you can't shoot with a really fast shutter speed. So I have my camera set to 250th of a second, which is really close to its sync speed. And so the next thing I'm going to do is I need to figure out what the aperture value is to get a proper exposure. And I'm going to do that by pointing it just behind Catherine at the tree. And so let me do that right now. So I'm shooting at 250th of a second, and I'm pointing up to the tree behind her where we're going to be shooting. And I'm adjusting my aperture, and it looks like we are set for about an aperture of 4, which is really good. Now, once I have that, I'm going to take a quick test shot to make sure that the background looks like I want it to look, which is just a little underexposed. So Catherine, look right at me, and good. Now I'm going to take a peek, and it does. It looks pretty good, but Catherine is really dark. So what I need to do is I need to meter my light so that it matches the aperture value, which is f4, that was set in my camera. So I'm using a Seikonic L758DR, which has a built-in pocket wizard to trigger my ProPhoto Acute B 600R, which also has a pocket wizard, so I can communicate between these two. So I'm going to come over here. Catherine, look straight ahead, and I'm going to meter now, and I want my flash to meter at f4, which is what my aperture value was. So I'm metering that, and we have f4 right there. So we got lucky that time, which is really good. But if it wasn't bright enough, I would increase power, and if it was too bright, I would decrease power so that my flash matched the proper aperture value. So I'm going to come back over here, and again, I'm going to take a test shot to see how this looks. So Catherine, look right at me. And great, I didn't turn on my pocket wizard, so let me do that one more time. So look right at me, excellent, perfect. Okay, now that fired. And I really like how that looks. We got a really nice soft look on her face, and the background looks pretty good. So now I'll play with that and adjust a little bit up or down with my flash, or I might change the background to be a little overexposed or underexposed, which is the great thing about this. Now that we have it locked in, we can season to taste. So let's shoot a couple pictures here, and let's go. Perfect, just like that, excellent. So chin down just a bit. Oh, I love that. Good, 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 good. That's excellent. So I'm going to overexpose the background here a little bit by slowing down my shutter speed. Good. That looks terrific. And that's a key. Remember, your aperture value is controlling your flash, and by slowing down your shutter, you can overexpose the background. So I slowed my shutter down to about 125th of a second and really got a really nice overexposed background. And that's all there is to it. Once you start shooting, make adjustments, shoot again, and as the sun keeps coming down, you're going to have to keep making adjustments because the light is constantly changing. And that's how you balance ambient light with the studio strobe. One thing I want to point out and make really clear is that when you're metering for the ambient light, you should not have your subject in the frame. Remember, you're exposing for the sky, not the subject. So make sure you point the camera just over the shoulder of your subject. And that's how you do it. Use manual mode, expose for the ambient light, adjust your flash to match, and then start shooting. And once you are shooting, make any adjustments as needed. Well, thanks for joining us this week. Remember, we have videos every single week. So if you like what you see, please subscribe and tweet about it. And if you have a question about photography or photography-related equipment, you can send them to me at askmark@adorama.com. And I'll see you next week.
This episode is brought to you by Adorama TV. Visit the Adorama Learning Center where you'll find photography tips and techniques, links to the gear used in this episode, and related videos. For all the latest photography, video, and computer gear, visit adorama.com. And the next time you're in New York City, visit our store located on 18th Street between 5th and 6th Avenue.